We're probably all familiar with the Genie, a magical being trapped inside a lamp that grants you 3 wishes when you set it free. But this version, the one most of us grew up with in movies and stories, is actually a Western adaptation of a much older idea. Because the original concept behind the Genie doesn't really come from fairy tales alone. It traces back to pre-Islamic Arabian folklore and later Islamic tradition and storytelling. And once you see what it originally was, it starts to feel very different from what we think of today. In my previous video, I explored why the computer game Heroes 3 refuses to die. Now that most of you know the context, I'm sure you noticed all the strange mythical creatures shown in the video. I grew up playing Heroes 3 as a 10-year-old kid, and I was completely captivated by its world and creatures. But one of those creatures was so foreign to me, I became literally obsessed with it. The Inferno faction is home to many creatures associated with hell and demonology, but there's one creature that always felt strangely out of place to me. The Ifrit, a strange, mischievous, mythical being often associated with genies and deception. Most of you are probably familiar with the Arabian Nights popularized version of the genie in Aladdin, which portrays the genie as comedic, talkative, and serving Aladdin. But that story actually wasn't part of the original 1001 Nights manuscript tradition, and was introduced by the French translator Antoine Galland in the 18th century. But there is a far lesser known story involving a jinni in the Arabian Nights. The story is about an old poor fisherman who finds a lamp in his net while fishing. The lamp has a mark of King Solomon on it, because in the Quran, Solomon had authority over jinn, granted to him by God. After the fisherman frees the genie, it explains that for the first 100 years of imprisonment, it swore to enrich whoever freed it forever, but nobody did. For the second 100 years, it swore to grant great wealth, but still, nobody freed it. After another century, it swore to grant 3 wishes, but still, no one came. But after 400 years of imprisonment, the jinni became enraged, and it swore to grant the person who freed it a choice of deaths instead. The fisherman eventually tricks it by asking how it managed to fit inside the lamp. Flattered, the jinni shows how, and in that moment moves itself back inside. But the fisherman quickly seals the lamp again before it can escape. And I think this story actually describes something deeply human. The Ifrit in the story is a very powerful being, and I think the story is trying to say that when power is contained, isolated, and left unchecked, it can turn into destruction, just like the jinni eventually does. The fact that it willingly returns into the bottle is also interesting to me, because maybe it suggests that pride or showing off can become your own undoing. In my view, through word of mouth, this story has morphed over time, and Western storytelling slowly changed the genie into a magical being that simply grants 3 wishes when freed. And you might ask yourself, why 3 wishes? Now this is debatable, but I like to think the number 3 is there for a reason. Humans have always had a ritualistic connection to the number 3, because it reflects patterns we see everywhere. Even life itself can be seen in 3 stages. We are born, we live, and then we die. The number 3 reflects that sense of completeness, which might be why it naturally fits in storytelling. In Arabic tradition, there is a concept called Al-Ghayb, the unseen. This refers to everything that exists, but is normally not perceptible to humans. It's not another universe, it's not a fantasy dimension, it's just reality that exists beyond normal human perception. And within that unseen reality, there is a category of beings known as the jinn. According to Islamic theology, jinn were created by God, just like humans. They are another form of creation, and they too have free will. Like humans, they can choose good or evil. The jinn are described as being created from smokeless fire, And this detail, I believe, is often important in later storytelling because it influenced how they were imagined in folklore and later in modern media. Over time, especially through French translation, the idea of the jinn gradually transformed into the genie. And instead of a free-willed being, it became a magical creature trapped in a lamp, granting wishes. Though in Islamic tradition, jinn are not all the same. Some are good, some are neutral, and some are rebellious. And among the most well-known figures in later folklore is the Ifrit. The Ifrit is often described as a powerful, intelligent, and rebellious type of jinn, associated with fire imagery, strength, and defiance. But the key thing is, it is not a separate species like a demon. It's simply a type of jinn. One of the most famous mentions of an Ifrit appears in a story involving Prophet Solomon in the Quran. Solomon asks, "Who can bring me the throne of the Queen of Sheba?" And Ifrit responds, "I can bring it to you before you rise from your seat." Then another being says, "I can bring it to you instantly." And the throne appears immediately. Honestly, when I first read this, it felt almost anticlimactic, like the Ifrit confidently steps forward and then just gets immediately outpaced. But that's actually where it becomes interesting to me, because the story isn't told like a fantasy battle. There's no drama, no fight scene, it's just brief statements. And to me, that feels intentional, because instead of focusing on spectacle, it focuses on comparison, different kinds of power placed side by side. And many interpretations suggest the point is to show that even powerful beings like jinn are still limited, and that ultimate power exists only within a higher divine framework. So, Islamic stories and concepts gradually made their way into Europe over time, and as they did, the image of the jinn slowly transformed. The Ifrit in Western culture became something very different, often portrayed as a demonic fire-based creature like in games such as Heroes of Might and Magic 3. At the same time, the genie evolved into something almost opposite, a wish-granting lamp spirit, usually playful or good. So what was once part of the same idea split into two completely different fantasy archetypes, and that's just undeniably interesting. So as you can see, what we call a genie today is really the result of a long cultural evolution of the idea of jinn. The Ifrit is just one branch of that, reshaped through translation, storytelling, and fantasy adaptation. And I think it's fascinating how a single concept can shift so much across cultures, until it becomes almost unrecognizable from where it originally came from. And it makes you wonder how it will keep evolving in the future, what kind of stories people will build from it next, and how much it will change again. But no matter what the future holds, I still think it's important that we remember where it all came from.
إن الله يعلم غيب السماوات والأرض والله بصير بما تعملون